ELLORA caves are the most important group of rock-cut monuments in all of India. Between the 6th and the 10th century CE, over 34 caves were dug out of the solid basalt rock of the Deccan Plateau. To create this wonder of ancient engineering, an estimated 500,000 to 1 million tons of rock had to be removed, enough to build 4 times the Colosseum in Rome. Other estimates put the total at nearly 6 million tons, the same as the Great Pyramid of Giza. The ELLORA caves are an example of architecture in the negative, for instead of being built by stacking stones on top of each other, they were created by slowly and painstakingly removing rock from the cliff, until only a monolithic core remained. The largest of them all, the Kailasha Temple, is a huge, multi-storied temple complex, 82 meters long by 30 meters high, whose construction alone likely required the removal of over 200,000 tons of stone. Not only are these caves immense in size, but they're also lavishly decorated, with a profusion of sculptures, low-relief carvings and paintings. Of a total of 34 major caves at ELLORA, 17 are Hindu, 12 are Buddhist and 5 Jain caves, each group representing the complex succession of royal dynasties and religions over the course of nearly a millennium in central Maharashtra. There are many mysteries surrounding the ELLORA caves, starting with the techniques employed for their construction, the true age of the caves, and the existence of subterranean passages leading to deeper and still unexplored levels. In this video, we will be exploring some of these mysteries, taking you through some of the most impressive and remarkable rock-cut monuments ever conceived by man in its thousands-years-old history. The ELLORA caves are located in central Maharashtra, about 30 kilometers northwest of the city of Aurangabad, and a 2-hour drive from the equally famous Ajanta caves. The ELLORA caves extend over more than 2 kilometers of a steep basalt rock face, characterized by the presence of layers of different hardness and composition, with only the most finely grained being picked for detailed sculpting. Some of the earliest caves, like Cave 29, were possibly built by the Shiva-worshipping Kalachuri dynasty in the late 6th century CE, and bear significant analogies to the Elephanta caves. The next group of caves, comprising caves 1 to 12, consists of a set of Buddhist monasteries and prayer halls, built between 600 and 700 CE under the early Chalukya dynasty, which ruled over much of central and southern India from their capital city of Badami in today's Karnataka. Finally, the largest group of Hindu and Jain caves, comprising the magnificent Kailasha Temple, or Cave 16, was carved between 730 and 950 CE by the kings of the Rashtrakuta dynasty, who succeeded the early Chalukyas in the mid-8th century CE. Because of the different dynasties that succeeded themselves over more than 3 centuries in this part of central Maharashtra, the ELLORA caves reflect not only the different religions prevailing under each dynasty, but also profoundly different architectural styles and artistic sensitivities, making the question of the cave's exact sequence and chronology one of the great puzzles of Indian archaeology and art history. Cave types range from immense pillared halls, like Cave 29, to huge freestanding monolithic structures, like Cave 16's Kailasha Temple, to large Buddhist prayer halls and multi-storied monasteries. Some of these caves remain unfinished and provide interesting glimpses into how these incredible monuments were carved and decorated. It It was only in the 13th century CE that the Ellora caves ceased to be an active worship place and pilgrimage destination, after the region came under Islamic rule of the Delhi Sultanate in 1294 CE. Much of the destruction and desecration of idols and images can be traced to the time between the 15th and the 17th century, when the site came again under attack by Muslim armies, enforcing a strict prohibition of the representation of Hindu and Buddhist deities. It is even said that in 1682 the Mughal king Aurangzeb ordered the complete destruction of the Kailasha temple. An army of 1,000 men attacked the temple and its sculptures for over 3 years, but could only inflict minimal damage to the structure. Although the caves were never truly lost, they were only rediscovered by Europeans in the colonial era and were subsequently studied and restored by the Archaeological Survey of India. For a long time, archaeologists believed that the earliest of the Ellora caves were a set of Buddhist excavations at the southern end of the cliff face, numbered 1 to 12. These caves were built between 600 and 730 CE and consist of a total of 11 viharas, or monasteries, and a single Chaitya prayer hall. The caves located farther south were the first to be constructed in the early 7th century CE. Cave 1 is probably the earliest Buddhist excavation at the site and consists of a simple meeting hall with 8 cells. Most of the early caves, like Cave 1 and 2, are viharas, or monasteries, consisting of a large square pillared hall on whose sides open smaller shrines decorated with sculptures and monastic cells. Most of the sculptures that ornate the walls represent Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in meditating poses. The main shrine is generally located on the back wall of the cave, opposite the entrance. Huge Dvarapala, or guardian sculptures up to 5 meters or 16 feet high, stand on each side of the doorway. Inside the sanctuary is a huge sitting Buddha statue on a lion throne. Caves 3 and 4, located behind a waterfall, have a similar design to Cave 2, but are in poor condition. Cave 3 is mostly remembered for a rather unusual window with 2 elegant colonnades, beyond which opens a relatively plain interior with some badly damaged sculptures. Between Cave 3 and 4 are some ornate rock-cut shrines containing images of the Buddha in a meditating pose, flanked by the Bodhisattvas Padmapani, the protector of the Buddha, and Maitreya. Cave 4 is the best preserved of this group and contains some beautiful Buddhist sculptures that contrast with the otherwise unfinished appearance of this cave. A short flight of steps leads from Cave 4 to Cave 5, located on a higher level of the cliff face. Cave 5 is known as the Maharvada Cave because it was used as a shelter by the Mahar tribe during the monsoon season. This is one of the largest viharas, measuring almost 40 meters deep by 20 wide. The most striking feature of this large monastery is a set of 2 benches running through the entire length of the hall, suggesting that this space may have either served as a communal dining hall or perhaps as a scriptorium, a writing room where manuscripts were copied and illustrated by the monks. 2 rows of 24 pillars, 12 on each side, support the enormous weight of the roof, whereas at the end of the hall and along the side walls open a shrine for the Buddha and 20 smaller cells for the monks. Continuing along the same rock ledge Caves 6 to 9 are partially ruined monasteries or viharas. Cave 6 contains some very fine sculptures, including a particularly striking pair depicting Tara, the Buddhist goddess of meditation, to the left of the doorway, and Mahamayuri, goddess of learning, to the right. These sculptures reinforce the possibility that the caves served as places of learning and meditation. Located on a lower level, Cave 8 consists of 2 connected rooms and a shrine surrounded by circumambulatory passage. On the farthest wall is another sculpture of Mahamayuri, goddess of learning, leading into a simply carved outer room on the back wall of which is a seated Buddha and bodhisattvas on each side. Cave 9 is the last cave of this group. It has a beautifully carved facade containing a series of 6 Buddhas framed by ornate arches, giving the impression of flight. The main shrine contains a seated Buddha with the bodhisattvas Padmapani and Vajrapani, protectors and guides of the Buddha, on each side. Next is Cave 10. This is one of the most ornate caves at ELLORA, and the only Buddhist chaitya, or prayer hall, at the site of this important Buddhist monastery. The cave is also known as Vishvakarma, in honor of the legendary craftsman and architect of the gods. The cave is entered through a gate leading into a spacious courtyard, all carved from the natural rock of the cliff, containing cells on both sides arranged on 2 stories. The Great Chaitya measures approximately 25 meters long by 12 meters wide, and is divided into 3 naves by 2 rows of 28 octagonal pillars, each over 4 meters high. At the end of the nave is a huge monolithic stupa, in the front of which stands a colossal statue of the Buddha, seated in a preaching pose. The roof has beams carved in the rock, imitating a wooden canopy, with even the pins at the joints of the beams reproduced in the hard basalt stone. An elaborate frieze runs on top of the pillars on both sides of the aisle, containing the depiction of Naga queens as well as dwarves and entertainers, dancing and playing a variety of musical instruments. Next from the Vishvakarma cave is Cave 11, a large 3-story Buddhist monastery. The name of this cave, Dotal, meaning 2 floors, suggests that either the 3rd story was a later addition or that the bottom floor was still buried at the time of this cave's discovery. The 3 floors are accessed by means of a single stairway and possess a similar layout, consisting of a portico facade with 8 pillars leading to various cells and shrines behind. These multi-storied rock-cut structures are a perfect example of what we earlier referred to as architecture in the negative. They possess all the characteristics of real buildings, including internal stairways, corridors, windows, and doorways, except that they're not fashioned out of stone blocks or brick, but carved entirely from the rock of the mountain. An even more remarkable example is Cave 12, called Tin Tal, or 3 stories. This is a huge rock-cut monastery, perhaps the single largest Buddhist monastery in all of Maharashtra, articulated on 3 levels with a portico facade of simple monolithic pillars. The 3 stories are all of similar plan, consisting of a huge pillared hall with a shrine at the end and smaller cells along the side walls. Interior stairways connect the different floors, often leading to small, hidden chambers, beautifully decorated with images of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas in meditating poses. The top floor is divided into 5 naves by rows of square pillars, 40 in total. The side walls of the chamber are adorned with images of female deities. The back wall contains 14 representations of Buddha, 7 on the north and 7 on the south, each portrayed in a different meditating, teaching, or preaching pose. Two colossal guardian sculptures in an unusual crossed arms pose stand guard to the shrine. The shrine itself contains a colossal image of the Buddha, flanked by bodhisattvas and guardian deities, carrying different kinds of weapons. Cave 12 is also the last of the Buddhist caves at ELLORA. Caves 13 to 15 are particularly interesting for they seemingly mark the transition from Buddhism to Hinduism, and are nested between the last of the Buddhist caves, Cave 12, and the Great Kailasha Temple, or Cave 16. Caves 13 and 14 are known as Ravan Kikali, and resemble in plan the Buddhist monasteries or viharas of the previous phase of construction at ELLORA. It is possible that they originated as Buddhist caves, and were only later converted into Hindu temples. The walls of these caves are decorated with lively carvings, offering a striking contrast with the mostly static and hieratic style of earlier Buddhist sculpture. Cave 14 is a large pillared hall containing a shrine with a circumambulatory passage, which would have once contained a statue of the goddess Durga. The shrine doorway is guarded by the 2 river goddesses Ganga and Yamuna. A tour of the cave reveals a whole series of narrative scenes, among which are some particularly striking representations of Varaha, the boar avatar of Vishnu, Shiva and Parvati playing dice, a dancing Shiva as Nataraja, the lord of dances, and the demon king Ravana shaking Mount Kailash. A short walk from there leads to Cave 15, known as Dasavatara, which is approached by a long stairway and a monumental gateway leading into a large open-air courtyard. In the middle of the courtyard is a freestanding monolithic mandapa, with a two-storied rock-cut temple at the rear. Because of its similarity with Buddhist caves, it is possible that this temple also originated as a Buddhist monastery and was only later converted into a Hindu monument, perhaps not longer after its completion. Other theories, however, suggest that the opposite may as well be true, and that the Buddhist caves represent an intrusion into an earlier Brahmanical pilgrimage site. The Hindu temple on the rear of Cave 15 consists of a huge pillared hall on 2 stories, resembling a Buddhist monastery or vihara, but containing Hindu sculptures and decorations on the walls and pillars. The finest of these relief carvings depicts the slaying of the demon Hiranyakashipu at the hands of Narasimha, the man-lion avatar of Vishnu. Other famous reliefs depict Vishnu taking his famous 3 steps, by which he measures the 3 worlds, earth, heaven, and the space between them. The descent of the Ganges, gently flowing down from the sky through Shiva's hair. Shiva emerging from a linga with flames around it, with Brahma and Vishnu in his boar form of Varaha digging down in the fruitless attempt to reach the base of the giant column. And Shiva as Tripurantanka, the destroyer of Tripura according to the Mahabharata, riding his chariot and about to strike the fatal blow with arms stretched. The panels are arranged in dyads on the opposite sides of the hall, in such a way as to suggest the equilibrium of antagonistic energies. There is also a Nandi statue at the entrance, facing the Linga sanctuary, although this appears to be a later addition. The Buddhist caves at ELLORA are some of the last that were built in all of India, at a time when Buddhism was already in decline across the subcontinent. Their interest resides more than anything in them marking the transition from Buddhism to Hinduism, with many of the earliest Buddhist monuments and caves being converted into Hindu temples during the late 8th and 9th century CE. No more Buddhist temples and rock-cut monasteries of this scale and size will be built in any part of India after ELLORA, representing both one of the grandest and latest expressions of Buddhist monumental architecture and sculpture of the course of nearly a millennium. The next phase of construction at ELLORA, under the Hindu kings of the Kalachuri and Rashtrakuta dynasties, would see building on an even grander scale, perfecting many of the architectural motifs first introduced in the earlier Buddhist caves and culminating in the gigantic Kailasha temple. The Kailasha temple of the ELLORA caves is a monument rivaling in splendor and size the pyramids of Egypt. Carved from a single rock, it is the largest monolithic structure in the world and the crowning achievement of nearly a millennium of Indian rock-cut architecture. Even its incredibly complex and intricate design pale in front of the fact that it was not built by stacking hundreds of thousands of stone blocks on top of each other, but was all carved from the living bedrock, leaving no room for errors or mistakes. So mysterious is this temple that some speculate it could not have been built with human technology, while others suggest that its construction dates back not centuries, but thousands of years ago. In the 8th century CE, with the decline of Buddhism in India, a new Hindu dynasty from the west-central part of the subcontinent, the Rashtrakuta, built an empire that stretched over 1,000 miles, from the southern tip of the Deccan to the Himalayas. Under kings like Dantidurga, the founder of the dynasty, Krishna I and Govinda III, the Rashtrakuta created one of the largest empires to ever rule over the Indian subcontinent since the times of the Maurya Empire of Ashoka the Great, nearly a millennium before. It is not known why the Rashtrakuta kings chose ELLORA, a site located far from the heart of their empire and of no strategic or political importance, for one of their greatest architectural achievements and construction projects, one that would take over 100,000 men and 18 years to complete. The Kailasha Temple is without a doubt the masterpiece of the ELLORA caves and the greatest monolithic rock-cut structure in the world. Its construction is generally attributed to the king Krishna I, who reigned from 756 to 773 CE, although very little is known about this temple's early history and construction. Carved out entirely from the living bedrock of the Deccan Plateau, the Kailasha Temple stands as an unparalleled feat of human genius and monolithic architecture. An estimated 250,000 to 500,000 tons of basalt had to be painstakingly removed to carve this gigantic temple, built as a representation of Mount Kailash, the abode of Shiva in the Himalayas. The temple architecture appears to be a combination of different North and South Indian styles, and includes a massive, almost pyramidal tower, representing the snow-capped peaks of Mount Kailash, abode of the god Shiva. The temple complex is entered through an unfinished monumental gateway, called a Gopura, decorated with gigantic sculptures. That leads into a spacious courtyard, also cut from the living rock, measuring an enormous 82 meters or 270 feet long by 46 meters or 150 feet wide, in the center of which stands the giant temple. The temple proper, which reaches a height of over 30 meters or 100 feet, is a massive two-story structure, consisting on the upper floor of a huge square pillared hall called a mandapa or pavilion, leading into the main linga sanctuary, above which rises a Dravidian-style shikara or tower. The roof of the mandapa pavilion is in the shape of a giant lotus, with 4 lion sculptures each pointing in a different cardinal direction. The temple tower rises in linear tiers, surrounded by smaller sanctuaries for different deities, and is surmounted by a huge monolithic dome. The interior of the mandapa is occupied by a vast pillared hall, carved like all the temple from the living bedrock itself. This dark hall has beautifully decorated pillars, and finely carved and polished ceilings and floors, being all of one piece with the walls and pillars. At the far end of the hall opens the Linga shrine, containing a huge monolithic Shiva lingam, resting on a circular drum provided with a channel to drain the liquids poured onto it. Right outside, facing the mandapa and the Linga shrine, is a smaller pavilion, also cut from the living bedrock, containing a statue of the Nandi bull, the vehicle of Shiva. This small ornate pavilion has 4 doors oriented towards the cardinal directions, and is connected by means of a suspended rock bridge to the entrance gopura on the second floor. All around the temple are rows of carvings depicting scenes from the great Hindu epics of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, as well as huge sculptural panels portraying the main Hindu gods and a variety of mythological scenes. The temple itself stands on a huge monolithic plinth or platform, from which emerge rows of huge life-size elephant sculptures, which appear to be holding the whole structure aloft. To the left and right of the main temple are two tall, highly ornate pillars, shaped like obelisks. They would have once held lamps on top. Various stone bridges and covered passageways connected the different parts of the temple with the entrance gopura and the side galleries. Carved out of the same living rock of the cliff, these dark passageways are quite rough and unfinished, and seem to have served more of a functional than any ceremonial or aesthetic purpose. In comparison, the side galleries are far more elaborately carved and lead into large prayer halls that are also richly decorated with pillars and sculptural panels. The Kailash temple may be rightfully considered as the crowning achievement of Indian rock-cut architecture, and possibly the greatest monolithic structure in the world. Even today, it is hard to imagine how many thousands of men and how many years would have been spent for its construction. Evidence shows that the temple was carved from the top down, by first creating a giant trench around a single stone block from which all the different parts of the temple were carved. Nearby Cave 30 provides important hints as to the techniques and methods by which the temple was carved. Cave 30 is an unfinished Hindu temple, also known as Chota Kailash or Little Kailash, for its resemblance to the Great Kailash temple. This cave was built probably a century or two later, and appears to be but a crude and unfinished imitation of its predecessor. It is nevertheless interesting, for it shows how the rock was removed by excavating downward until only a single megalithic block remained. Huge square or rectangular lumps of rock were removed, perhaps with the use of wedges or fire, a technique that was also clearly applied for excavating nearby Cave 31, another abandoned excavation. These far smaller and cruder excavations, in their unfinished state, show just how exceptional the Kailash temple is among all Indian rock-cut architectures, both in size and sculptural decoration. An estimated 250,000 to 500,000 tons of basalt had to be removed from the sloping rock face to create this marvel of monolithic architecture from a single stone block 82 meters long by 46 meters wide. Even taking the lower figure of 250,000 tons for the total volume of rock removed, this is equivalent to an astonishing 4 tons an hour for 18 years. And this is without considering the numerous side temples and shrines built on the sides of the same gigantic trench. According to a popular medieval Marathi legend, the temple was built in a week's time with the help of the god Shiva. A local queen prayed the god Shiva to restore the king's health, promising to construct a grand temple if her wish was granted, and to fast until the temple was completed. Worried about his queen, the king, whose health had been restored, called all the best architects in the realm, but all considered the task impossible. Only one architect, by the name of Kokasa, took the challenge, and with the help of Shiva was able to finish the temple within a week, by carving a giant rock, thus releasing the queen from her fast. According to another popular legend, the Mughal king Aurangzeb vainly attempted to destroy the Kailash temple in the 17th century. 1,000 men attacked the temple with fire and pickaxes for 3 years, but could only do minimal damage to the structure and to its sculptures. If 1,000 men could not leave but the faintest scars on the temple's walls, we may only speculate at what tools were used to carve and sculpture this gigantic structure from the most untreatable basalt in such elegant and delicate forms. No evidence of the tools used has been found, yet it is obvious that even the hardest bronze and iron tools would have quickly worn out and be consistently replaced. If stone tools were used, where are the hammers and pounders that one would expect to find by the thousands or tens of thousands all over the site? And this is not to speak of what is perhaps the greatest mystery of all. What happened to the hundreds of thousands of tons of basalt that were removed for carving these wonders and hollowing out these gigantic caves from the living rock? If a volume of stone equivalent to the pyramid of Menkore at Giza was removed for the construction of the Kailasha temple alone, where did all that stone go? Certainly, such a gigantic pile would not have gone unnoticed. Yet, it is as if over 250,000 tons of rock, and this is only including the Kailasha temple alone, simply vanished into thin air. The construction of this veritable wonder of the world is generally attributed to the 8th century Rashtrakuta king Krishna I, who reigned between 756 and 773 CE. Yet in spite of all the profusion of carvings and decorations, the temple is almost entirely devoid of inscriptions that may shed some light on the great mystery of its age. The temple, combining so many different architectural and sculptural styles, in addition to its immense size, has led many historians to believe that its construction spanned the reign of more than one king, each expanding the temple and adding their own carvings and decorations. Yet it is strange that no king would seemingly claim credit for the construction or completion of what is arguably one of the greatest structures ever built in the whole thousands-years-old history of India. Just like the pyramids of Egypt, this great monument lacks inscriptions that could point to the identity of its builders, but stands instead as a silent witness to the advanced science of a long-lost and bygone age. The Kailasha temple may be considered as the masterpiece of the Ellora caves, but it is by no means the only Hindu cave at the site. Thirteen more Hindu caves were carved in the cliff face to the north of the Kailasha temple, numbered 17 to 29. Cave 29, located at the northernmost edge of the cliff, may well be the earliest Hindu cave built at Ellora, dating perhaps from the mid-5th or early 6th century CE. Also called Dumarlena, Cave 29 is one of the largest at Ellora, and appears to be an almost exact replica of the Elephanta cave. Cave 29, however, surpasses the Elephanta cave in size and in the quality of its ornamentation, so that no consensus exists as to which came first, Elephanta or Ellora. The floor plan of Cave 29 is identical to that of the Great Cave of Elephanta, having the same 3 separate openings towards the cardinal directions. The enormous pillared hall is in the shape of a cross, 50 meters or 150 feet deep by 80 meters or 250 feet wide. Dozens of massive monolithic pillars with cushioned capitals support the roof, dividing the space into 5 naves. Large sculptures decorate the walls at the end of the naves. These include a stunning depiction of the demon king Ravana shaking Mount Kailash, being one of the favorite subjects portrayed in the Ellora caves. The wedding of Shiva and Parvati, accompanied by a 3-headed Brahma, acting as a priest and kneeling before the sacrificial fire. And Shiva in his destructive form of Andakasuravada, slaying the king of the demons, Andaka, by piercing him with a spear. These carvings are of exceptional artistic quality and may be ranked among the finest examples of Hindu art of all times. The main shrine is a square room with 4 doorways aligned to the cardinal directions, each guarded by a pair of gigantic Dvarapalas. Because of this cave's similarity to the Elephanta cave, Cave 29 is possibly one of the earliest excavations at Ellora. It may have been created by the Kalachuri dynasty in the 5th or 6th century CE. However, the lack of inscriptions makes any dating hypothesis necessarily tenuous. A steep trail leads down from Cave 29 towards the ravine, which forms here a spacious bay occupied by a waterfall during the monsoon season. Located almost directly under the waterfall, the much ruined Cave 28 is a little more than a hole in the rock. Cave 27, located on the other side of the ravine, is another simple cave, yet spectacularly located on a narrow ledge with a view of the waterfall during the monsoon season. Farther along, Cave 26 has Elephanta-style columns with cushioned capitals. At the end of the spacious hall is a linga shrine containing a large square pedestal and a linga. The linga shrine is flanked by huge Dvarapala sculptures, while the pilasters on both sides of the shrine are decorated with sensual female deities. Next, we find Cave 25. This is a large but much ruined excavation, having lost its entrance porch, of which only the bases of 6 large columns and pilasters remain. Continuing south, one reaches Cave 24, a series of 5 low cells, popularly known as Teli Kagana, or the oilman's mill, perhaps because an oil press had been installed in this cave long after it ceased to serve as a temple. A little farther along, a monumental, although much ruined gateway leads into the courtyard of Cave 22, whose most notable feature is the square Nandi pavilion placed directly in front of it. The cave itself consists of a large hall with side chapels supported by pillars. The sanctum contains a highly polished linga with blue streaks, which give this cave its name of Nilkanta. Continuing south, Cave 21 is the next important Brahmanic cave. Also known as Rameshvara, it is preceded by a large courtyard with a tall monolithic platform with a couching Nandi. The capitals of the veranda are exceptionally ornate with sensual female figures, standing under foliage and accompanied by diminutive attendant dwarfs. The large hall behind contains several shrines or chapels, decorated with sculptures and beautiful relief carvings. To the left of the entrance, these include a particularly striking representation of the demon king Ravana shaking Mount Kailash, with Shiva and Parvati sitting on top. The chapel on the north side contains a representation of Durga slaying the buffalo demon Mahisashura Mardini. The wedding of Shiva and Parvati, with a 3-headed Brahma kindling the ceremonial fire and a procession of dwarves and musicians. And the tall 4-armed Skanda, the son of Shiva and Parvati, here portrayed as a warrior god with a youthful appearance, holding a large bird by the neck and flanked by 2 enigmatic ram-headed figures. A similar chapel on the south side contains even more striking sculptural representation. These include a beautiful representation of Shiva as Nataraja, the lord of dances, and the 7 mother goddesses known as Saptamatrikas, originally identified with the 7 stars of the Pleiades constellation. On the right wall is a particularly striking scene depicting a tall, four-armed skeleton carrying a knife, and the goddess Kali, carrying a severed head in one hand and wearing a snake around her neck. The columns of the hall are in the Elefanta style, with cushioned capitals, elegantly framing the rich decoration of the interior. Immediately south of the Rameshvara cave, one passes through caves number 20, 19, and 18. These are quite simple excavations, almost devoid of ornamentation and of rather plain appearance. Yet it is obvious that their construction must have still required a considerable effort and the removal of thousands of tons of hard basalt rock from the cliff face. Some of these caves appear to have suffered significant damage and destruction, either at the hands of men or because of countless centuries of weathering and erosion. Finally, one reaches Cave 17, the last cave in this group, located a mere 400 meters to the north of the Kailasha temple. The cave is particularly noteworthy for its decorated doorway and highly ornate pillars. It is entered through a projecting porch that leads to a colonnade hall and a linga sanctuary with a circumambulatory passage. Compared to the square pillars of the front, the inner ones have delicately ornate brackets carved with sensual female figures and dwarf attendants. The shrine door is elegantly sculptured with colossal guardian statues, or dvarapalas, on each side of the entrance. After Cave 17, only one more Hindu cave will be carved out to the north of the site. Cave 30, or Little Kailash, shows evidence of having been started as a Hindu temple, quite possibly a late, crude copy of the Great Kailash Temple, but remained unfinished and was only later converted into a Jain temple. This cave, together with caves 31 to 34, belongs to the last group of caves at ELLORA, which were carved towards the end of the 9th century or the beginning of the 10th century CE to honor the religion of Jainism. Although smaller than most other Hindu and Buddhist caves, would these Jain temples lack in size, they more than compensate with the quality and refinement of their ornamentation, being perhaps some of the last yet finest examples of monolithic rock-cut architecture in all of India. The Jain caves comprise the last great group of caves at ELLORA. They are a set of 5 caves, numbered 30 to 34, located at the northernmost end of the site, about half a mile away from the other larger groups of Buddhist and Hindu caves. These caves, whose decoration dates perhaps to the late 9th or early 10th century AD, are dedicated to Jainism, one of the 3 great religions of India, all of which are represented at ELLORA in a profusion of cave temples, sculptures, and relief carvings. Cave 30 is the first of the Jain caves, and may have originated as a Hindu temple under the Rashtrakuta dynasty, in the latter part of the 10th century AD. Located at a slightly higher level than most of the other caves, Cave 30 appears today as a huge unfinished excavation, containing but the shell of what would have been a grand freestanding rock-cut temple. Because of its similarity to the Great Kailasha Temple, but owing to its smaller size and unfinished state, this cave is commonly known as Chota Kailash, meaning the Little Kailash. Like the Great Kailash Temple, it is entered through a low rock-cut gopura, leading into a portico in front of the temple proper. A large, open-air courtyard surrounds the temple on all sides, although here the work is unfinished and comparatively very crude. The pit measures less than half that of the Great Kailash Temple, at about 40 meters or 130 feet long by 25 meters or 80 feet wide, with two rather crude and unfinished excavations on both sides. The temple itself has a square mandapa, supported by 16 massive monolithic pillars. The sanctum is empty, except for a pedestal that would have once supported a lingam. Most of the sculptures appear to be dedicated to the cult of Indra rather than of Shiva, and include representations of dancers and musicians. The temple may thus have been conceived as a representation of the celestial paradise, filled with a variety of heroes and heavenly beings. In its present state, this temple only contains the top story and is lacking a ground floor or pedestal, suggesting that work stopped at a rather early stage of carving. Perhaps owing to its unfinished state, however, it allows us to better understand how these huge rock-cut monuments were carved from the top down, by cutting deep trenches on the sides until only a central monolithic plinth remained. It is possible that Cave 30 was started as a Hindu temple but remained unfinished and was later redecorated and repurposed as a Jain temple. Following the same trail from Cave 30, one reaches the next group of Jain caves. Cave 31 is another unfinished excavation. A narrow rock-cut path leads to a large open-air courtyard, on whose eastern side opens a beautifully carved and decorated four-pillared entrance porch. In spite of its incompleteness, or perhaps because of it, this cave is of extreme interest for understanding how the larger cave temples were carved from the living rock. All around the temple and in the courtyard may be seen the tool marks left by axes and chisels, and large rectangular depressions from which the rock was removed, perhaps with the use of wedges. The temple itself contains but very few sculptures and a pair of beautifully decorated pillars, which offer a sharp contrast with the otherwise crudely carved and unfinished interior, with only a small carved altar decorated with ascetic figures being the only obviously Jain element in this temple. A little farther along, a set of three more caves, numbered 32 through 35, open at the northernmost end of the cliff. These were some of the latest caves to be built at ELLORA, and although significantly smaller than some of the other Hindu and Buddhist caves at the site, what they lack in size, they more than compensate with the richness and variety of their sculptural decoration. Cave 32, also called Indrasabha, contains some of the most elaborate carvings at the ELLORA caves. Rather than a single cave, this appears to be a set of interconnected excavations, lacking a precise plan. The center of the court is occupied by a monolithic chapel, with an 8 meters high column on its left-hand side and an elephant on its right. Large pillared halls framed by elegant verandas open on each side of the court. Making this cave's floor plan even more confusing, the halls on the second floor may be entered also through nearby Cave 33. Located just besides the Indrasabha, Cave 33 is the second largest in the Jain group of caves. It is preceded by a much smaller court, which had once contained sculptures that are now completely destroyed. Besides the entrance porch of Cave 33 opens a huge pillared hall. From there, a narrow corridor connects with the second floor of Cave 32. This consists of a massive pillared hall with highly ornate columns and exceedingly fine sculptures of meditating Jainas and the 24 Tirthankaras or saviors of Jainism. According to Jainist beliefs, 24 Tirthankaras, prophets and spiritual teachers of mankind, appeared over the course of millions of years, the last in order of time being Mahavira, the Buddha, in the 6th century BC. Numerous other carvings adorn this temple, including a colossal image of Matanga, the Jain god of prosperity, and the mother goddess Ambika, sitting on her lion under the mango tree. Unlike the other Hindu and Buddhist caves, whose design obviously served specific ritual or habitational purposes, there are very little hints as to the function and use of these Jain cave temples. In spite of all the richness of their decoration, their general plan is confusing and almost compressed, as if arising rather by accident than as the result of a well-conceived design, with newer caves and corridors often intersecting older ones. It is quite possible that these caves, like so many others at the site, may have originated in an antiquity far more remote and were only converted and adapted to the religion of Jainism at a much later time. The ELLORA caves were clearly created and remained in use over a long period of time, often combining elements from different religions or being appropriated by others. This is particularly evident in some of the Hindu caves adapting earlier Buddhist viharas, or in the confusing and rather chaotic design of the Jain caves. With only a handful of inscriptions allowing to date the carvings inside the caves, the chronology and sequence of the ELLORA caves remains highly problematic. Even more so, since the few inscriptions that are found inside the caves may only serve to date when their decoration was completed, but not the time of their construction. The available evidence suggests that many earlier sculptures were either recarved or completely removed when a new religion took over a certain cave, making it all but impossible to determine when the caves were first carved or by whom. There is then also the question of whether the Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain caves were all in use at the same time, which would suggest a rather pacific cohabitation of the three major religions of ancient India at the site, or rather reflect an occupational sequence in which one religion took over and completely replaced the previous ones. Many legends circulate on the possibility that a vast subterranean city extends far below the caves that are known to the thousands of tourists who visit ELLORA every day. The accesses to these hidden caves are either blocked or too narrow to allow even the passage of a small child. The legends seem to find confirmation in the numerous unexplained holes and ventilation shafts that may be seen in some of the caves, reaching down to some unknown depths, and in the extremely narrow tunnels that from the lower levels of the ELLORA caves appear to stretch far into the darkness, without any visible outlet nor the least hint as to how these tiny passages could have been carved in the hard basalt rock, where not even a child would fit. But perhaps the greatest mystery of all remains that of how the larger caves were carved, and what happened to the hundreds of thousands of tons of rock that were removed in the process. For all their decorative richness and refinement, the later caves appear to be but crude copies of the earlier cave temples, none coming even close to the splendor and architectural perfection of the great Kailash temple. The Kailash temple remains an unsurpassed achievement of megalithic engineering, the secrets of its construction being all but forgotten in the following centuries. No more rock-cut temples would be built after the 9th and early 10th century AD, a fact that may only be partially attributed to the rise of Islam and the Muslim conquest of large parts of northern and southern India. ELLORA is both the last and the greatest of the Indian rock-cut monuments, a silent memorial meant, like the Egyptian pyramids, to defy the millennia, upon which neither nature nor man seem to hold any power.